The first contact wasn't an invasion, it wasn't fireworks, laser beams, or the typical alien scream fests fed to Earth's media for decades. No, it was far quieter, colder. They arrived with silence, positioning their ships above every major capital like gods admiring an ant farm. No threats, no greetings, just a display of power so absolute it felt like humiliation. By the third day, all major satellites were hijacked. They didn't disable them. They just took over the feeds, showing the same calm, blue-skinned face, staring down at humanity with eyes void of malice, yet absent of empathy. His voice was deep, artificial, chilling. He spoke in every language at once. You have exhausted your potential. Your civilization will be preserved under management. That phrase, under management, became a curse whispered across continents. We weren't conquered. We were leased farms, mines, oceans, entire cities, turned into operations, not war zones, resources, and we the people, labor, assets, no chains, no beatings, just control, perfect, invisible, unrelenting. They called themselves the Cathari, according to them. We were not worth extermination. We were salvageable, just underperforming, worth regulating. Their technology immobilized any weapon system. We had satellites, refused to obey us. Drones that didn't belong to us circled our cities like watchdogs. Every world leader was made irrelevant in a week. The illusion of governance continued, but Earth was no longer sovereign. They didn't ban religion, culture, or speech. They didn't need to. They imposed quotas, mineral extraction, industrial outputs, agricultural yield. If you missed one, cities went dark, entire cities. Power cut, transportation frozen, no explanation, no mercy. The first to rise in protest were a group of ex-soldiers and engineers from Siberia, smart men, angry men. They tried to build a jammer, something small, crude, meant to disrupt Kethi drones for 10 seconds. It failed. Their hideout was vaporized in less than a minute, not bombed, erased, and then broadcasted uncensored to every screen in the world. A warning. But it only fueled the fire. The Cathari couldn't comprehend emotion, not truly. Their logic was absolute. Their flaw was that they underestimated pain, the kind of pain only humans could weaponize, the kind of rage that doesn't care if it lives or dies so long as it drags something else into the fire with it. Underground movements started forming. They weren't armies, just people, mechanics, teachers, convicts, forgotten veterans, sharing knowledge, hacking scraps of tech, speaking in code. They called themselves the Reminder, a name that carried a simple promise humanity remembers. And we repay in kind. One of them was a man named Jacob Ward, former aerospace engineer, father, widower, a man who lost his wife to a medical system the Cathari optimized by denying treatment to anyone deemed non-essential labor. She died on a hospital floor, while machines calculated efficiency ratings. Jacob had no interest in rebellion at first. He wanted to die, but then his daughter Lena was taken, not killed, not enslaved, reallocated. That was the word, assigned to a research ship orbiting Mars as part of genetic compatibility studies. Something in him cracked. Not all revolutions start with heroes, some start with broken fathers. Jacob began building not a bomb, not a weapon, a signal, something crude but disruptive, old tech, analog, not traceable. It wasn't meant to destroy, just scream loudly, irrationally, emotionally, humanly, something the Cathari couldn't process. And when he turned it on, it worked for 7 minutes. Every Cathar-controlled drone in a 100-mile radius shut down, just shut down, not permanently, but enough to scare them. They traced the source. They came for him. But when they arrived, they didn't find Jacob. They found a note. It read, "Push us too far, then see what happens." And so it began, not a war, but a promise of one. The Cathari didn't react with panic. They didn't scream, didn't retaliate with fire. That wasn't their way. Their ships simply hovered higher, farther, as if Jacob's message didn't matter. But in their cold silence, humanity heard it clearly. They were watching. They were learning. They didn't understand what they'd just awakened. Jacob didn't go into hiding. He knew better than to think he'd outrun an empire that had mapped his DNA the day it arrived. Instead, he went underground, not beneath dirt or concrete, but beneath identity. He changed his appearance, rewrote his records, and with the help of a former hacker from Manila, erased himself from the system entirely. But Jacob wasn't running, he was moving, preparing, planning. He wasn't alone across the world. Similar pockets of resistance began to stir, not connected, not organized yet, but driven by the same hunger, loss, anger, that specific sharp rage that only comes when your children are no longer yours, and the air you breathe feels stolen. In Istanbul, a former war surgeon named Ferd dissected Cathari drones with the patience of a butcher, trying to find patterns in their construction. He didn't speak much, his eyes told his story. He'd lost someone, probably many, in Bogota. A street thief turned technician, known only as Bricks, cracked the shell on a Cathari energy core and turned it into a field generator that disrupted scanning protocols for 10 seconds at a time, not much but enough. In Lagos, an old priest with a burned hand read encrypted sermons from an ancient Bible. Lined with Cathari radio schematics, he wasn't praying, he was recruiting. These were not heroes, they weren't pure, they weren't chosen, but they were necessary, and Jacob Ward became the whisper on every rebel's lips, the man who made the machines blink. They didn't call it hope, that word was dead. They called it something else, the first pulse. That's what they named Jacob's moment of rebellion. Not a battle, a signal, a pulse, the first proof that the enemy could bleed. The Cathari didn't bleed red, but they bled control. And that was enough. For a while Jacob moved between outposts, never staying more than 3 nights. He spoke sparingly. He wasn't a leader, but he was respected, if not feared. People saw in his silence a kind of clarity. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to break something. One night in a safe house beneath what used to be a Detroit subway station, Jacob met with Bricks Ferd, and a half-paralyzed engineer named Ola, who once worked on Martian colony robotics. They huddled over a dusty map of North America. Bricks was impatient, always was. Look, I get it. We send a signal, it makes them twitch, cool. But what's next? That's not a war plan, that's a tantrum. Jacob's eyes didn't lift. Not a tantrum, a test. Ferd nodded slow. We saw reactions, delays in protocol. Reboots, their systems lagged. That tells me they're not as centralized as they claim. They're strong, yes, but not omniscient. Ola tapped the corner of the map. Here, this was an old atmospheric relay tower for precath satellites. If we climb it and hijack the upper beacon, we might get a signal past low orbit, maybe even toward Mars. Jacob looked up now, just once. Lena. That was all he said. The room went still. Everyone knew they didn't ask questions. The Cathari hadn't killed his daughter, but taking her might have been worse. Everyone feared death, but Jacob feared forgetting. If they erased her name, her memories, herself, then what was he fighting for? The plan was reckless, dangerous, doomed maybe. But that's why it had power. The Cathari didn't believe humans would risk themselves without guaranteed reward. That was the flaw in their calculus. They didn't know how dangerous desperation could be. 3 nights later, Jacob stood at the base of the old relay tower. In what used to be Nebraska, the structure rose like a decaying middle finger to the stars, untouched by the curry, only because it wasn't worth their notice. Air was cold, sharp. Every breath he took felt like gravel in his throat. Bricks was beside him, muttering, tightening a makeshift harness over Jacob's shoulders. You sure it's got to be you up there? Bricks asked. Jacob didn't answer immediately. His eyes traced the vertical stretch of rusted steel above them. He didn't want to do this, his shoulder still etched from where a Cathari drone had grazed him 2 weeks ago. But he couldn't ask anyone else. It's not just about reaching Mars, Jacob said. It's about sending the right message. If they're watching, they'll see me, and they'll know I haven't stopped. Bricks scoffed. Yeah, real noble or real suicidal. Jacob smirked. They weren't alone. Ferd waited with Ola and 2 other new recruits, young, hungry. One barely 20. Olia was typing furiously on a dusty terminal linking into the tower's old grid. We've got a 6-minute window before the Cathari net realigns over this sector, she warned. Once you're up there and the signal starts, it'll be fast. Jacob didn't reply. He began climbing. The tower groaned under his weight, old steel whining. Like a wounded animal, he ascended fast, arms burning, legs shaking. but his mind stayed clear-focused. Every rung he pulled himself up brought Lena's face back into view, her smile, her laugh, the last time he held her just before the allocation unit. It came. He reached the top muscles, screaming, and jammed the signal device into the transmission core, a handheld unit wrapped in analog casing, designed by Bricks, tuned by Olia. It wasn't elegant, but it would roar. The wind howled, a flash of light blinked across the sky. Cathari drones scanning now. He barked into the comm below. Ola hit the trigger and Earth screamed. The signal blasted out, ancient tech, amplified by raw improvisation. Every Cathari drone within 100 miles glitched for 10 seconds. They were blind, deaf, dumb, but this time it wasn't local. The relay tower reached beyond orbit, to Mars, to the genetic ships, to the sectors where children like Lena were kept. The message was simple, a voice, Jacob's voice. I remember I'm coming, and I'm not alone. Far away on a Cathari flagship above Mars. A technician glanced at his readings, a pulse, a human signal, emotional resonance, embedded within non-digital packets, unclassified anomaly. The AI translator said. The Cathari commander's face twisted, not in fear, but in calculation. They thought humans could be broken. They didn't understand what happens when you threaten a man's child back on Earth. The response was swift. A Curie vessel descended, soundless and shimmering like a god's blade. It tore through the sky above the relay tower and vaporized the top in a column of blue light. Jacob wasn't there. He jumped, hooked to a glide rig Bricks had welded from old wingsuit tech. He landed hard, shoulder first into frozen dirt, rolling to a stop, body screaming in pain. But he was alive, and the message had gone outfared, and Ola dragged him into the van. Bricks floored it. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Jacob lay in the back, bleeding, bones rattling. And he smiled back at the underground base, one of many nameless holes scattered beneath collapsed cities. Jacob was stabilized. Fared worked in silence, wrapping the shredded flesh of Jacob's shoulder with a mix of nano-gel and stitched cloth. He didn't ask questions. Pain was common now, but what wasn't common was success. The message had gone out. Olia confirmed it from her terminal. A ripple of code feedback surged from orbit. The Cathari were shifting positions, not retreating, no, never that, but adjusting. They're scared, she said. Bricks laughed bitterly. No, they're not scared, they're curious. And that was worse. The Cathari didn't fear, but they investigated every anomaly, every deviation, like surgeons poking at a tumor. They'll come for us harder now, Bricks added. We just drew blood. Jacob sat up, wincing. Good, he said. Let them come in the next few days. The world felt tighter, harsher, as if the atmosphere itself had noticed humanity's insolence and was squeezing tighter around its neck. Cities flickered. Some drones stopped responding, but only temporarily. The Cathari recalibrated faster than anyone expected, but so did humans in New Delhi. An entire sewer district rewired itself into a communications web, using pipe vibration to pass undetectable messages. In Vancouver, artists carved Cathari code fragments into public murals, decoded only under infrared light, guiding rebels to safe houses. In Morocco, a farmer built an EMP cannon from rusted car parts and downed weather balloons, and downed his first drone with it before vanishing into the sands. The world hadn't unified, but it had remembered something vital. Survival doesn't need permission. 1 week after Jacob's signal, something strange happened at 3:17 a.m. Earth Standard Time. Every Cathari monitor blinked. A new face appeared, not blue-skinned, not alien, human. A girl, Lena. She didn't speak. Her eyes stared into the screen, wide, confused, and behind her blurs movement. Human children, dozens, maybe hundreds. Then the feed cut. No warning, no follow up, just a flash of truth. It wasn't meant for Earth. It was a mistake, a glitch, or perhaps a warning. In the wake of that moment, something broke. People stopped calling themselves survivors. They started calling themselves fighters. Jacob, he didn't sleep that night. He sat by a broken monitor, the screen still faintly glowing her image. burned into the phosphor. She was alive, not safe, not saved, but alive. That changed everything. He looked at Bricks, at Holy, at Fared. No one needed to speak. The next step was no longer rebellion, it was rescue. And if the Cathari still didn't understand what they had awakened, they were about to learn 3 days after the glitch. The moment Lena's face appeared on every screen across Earth, the world changed again, not because the Cathari reacted violently, not because they retaliated, but because they didn't. And that silence, it was louder than any threat. The Cathari weren't ignoring it. They were calculating. Jacob knew it, felt it in his bones. It wasn't just strategy. It was something deeper, the kind of silence that always came before a storm. In the shadows of that silence, humans began building. Louder in the sewers beneath Warsaw, a rebel known as Talon detonated a Qatari day. The node stealing 30 seconds of raw alien code. 30 seconds, that's all it took to teach engineers in Mexico City how to fry scanner drones mid-flight. In a broken-down medical tent in Seoul, a surgeon developed a way to reprogram pacemakers to emit short-burst radio pulses, turning every dying body into a beacon of rebellion. And in the decaying corridors of a former military lab deep in Kazakhstan, Jacob stood with Ola Bricks and Fared, facing something few humans had seen in years, a Curie brain. It was no bigger than a watermelon encased in clear gel. It pulsed faintly with light. The color shifted blue to green, then violet. It wasn't organic, not completely. Cathar lived in the space between biology and machine. Olia stared at it like it might blink. This, she whispered, is their memory bank, their logic core. It doesn't store data the way we do. It stores meaning. Bricks frowned. You saying it's alive? Not alive, but not dead either. It processes through emotional residue. They don't just analyze what we do, they analyze why. Jacob stepped closer. So it saw Lena's message. Fared nodded. More than saw it, felt it. That explained everything. The glitch wasn't a mistake. It was the Cathari brain responding, echoing emotion, broadcasting confusion. A system overwhelmed by something it wasn't built to process. Grief. Jacob didn't waste time. If the Cathari could be rattled by emotion, if they could be pierced by it, then that was weapon, not bombs, not EMP, but raw human experience, memories, pain, love, fear, the very things they tried to strip from Earth. Then we give them more, Jacob said quietly. Bricks blinked. More. What more? Truth. The plan formed fast. Olia knew a way to hijack Cathari transmission towers using old Earth satellites still in decaying orbit. Fared mapped out which locations had the strongest chance of temporary airspace silence, places where clouds, magnetic storms, and radiation could buy them minutes of blindness. They chose Antarctica, a former research base buried beneath snow and steel, once powered by solar fields long shattered. Now it was just a skeleton, but it was still wired, still capable of bouncing signals into space, if given the right push. Why there? Bricks asked. Why not somewhere closer? Because they won't expect us to go where nothing's left to take, Jacob answered. And because the cold didn't matter, not compared to what he had to say. The journey took 3 days. They rode through decoy air tunnels, subglacial rivers, and dead zones littered with broken K-Reun. Jacob spent most of it writing, not a plan, a letter, a message, not to Earth, to the Cathari. He didn't want to negotiate. He didn't want to explain humanity. He wanted to expose it. Every line was a blade, every word carved from memory. He spoke of loss, of Lena, of the moment. Her laughter stopped echoing in the house. He spoke of the hospital that denied his wife, of standing in line for a medicine that never came. He spoke of betrayal, not just by the Cathari, but by the silence of a world that let it happen. When he finished, he recorded it. No music, no editing, just his voice, cracked, raw, unforgiving. And then they reached the base. They found the uplink half frozen, sealed behind a door welded shut by time and permafrosted. Took Bricks 4 hours to get it open. Inside, dust and ice blanketed dead monitors, cracked terminals, and cables like frozen veins. Olia got to work. Her hands were stiff, wrapped in thick gloves, but her mind moved sharp and fast. She spoke to the machines like they were old friends betrayed by the silence of years. Satellite 2002. 147 is still catching drift, she muttered. Dead link. But I can juice it through the tower's backup battery. We'll get one shot, maybe less. Jacob stepped forward, the recording chip clenched in his fingers. He didn't tremble. He plugged it in the room. Dimmed power, rerouted lights flickered like gasping lungs. Then transmission. The signal launched skyward, screaming, past clouds, past broken skies, past the Kiri Vale. It reached the orbiting network, and from there, it spread across Earth. Every key interface blinked, then glitched, then played. Jacob's voice, raw, human, unfiltered, hit. Words bled into their systems like poison into glass. Every syllable was a fracture, every breath an infection. And the Kiri, those perfect cold conquerors, paused. Ships halted, midair drones hovered, twitching. Some fell, others blinked out. And above Mars, in the sector where Lena had been glimpsed, another face appeared, not hers. Jacob staring directly into their surveillance systems, daring them. You pushed us too far, now see what happens. When the transmission ended, the world held its breath. The Cathari didn't retaliate immediately, but in low orbit, new movement stirred. Ships repositioned. From the void, something larger emerged, a new kind of ship, black, silent, predatory. It began descending, not over cities, not over landmarks, but over Antarctica, straight toward Jacob, straight toward the pulse. The sky over Antarctica didn't burn, it darkened. The Cathari ship moved like a shadow, with purpose, swallowing light as it descended. It made no sound, no theatrical display of dominance. It didn't need to. Its silence was the loudest message, yet they're not here to negotiate. Fared, muttered. Jacob stood at the edge of the cracked launch platform, wind slicing across his face. The cold no longer mattered, not with what was coming. Olia was already packing up their gear, pulling out data cores and drives. Get the signal replicator out of here, Jacob said. They can take the tower, not the tech. Bricks didn't argue. For once his mouth stayed shut. His eyes were locked on the ship above his fingers twitching near the sidearm he knew was useless. Jacob turned to Fared. You see anything useful in the ruins? Fared shook his head. Nothing explosive. But I found something else. He held up a rusted ID badge. Antarctica Base Security Clearance Level Black. Someone used this place for more than research. Jacob took it, sliding it into his belt. His instincts were flaring. Something deeper was hidden in the base, something even the Kiri might not have known about. And the ship, it was coming for it, not just for him. The ship landed softly, like it had always belonged to the Earth. A hatch opened, and from it emerged one being, not an army, not even a squad, just one. He looked Cathari, blue skin, biotech armor, silver veins pulsing beneath his scalp. But his eyes, they were human, brown, alive, and full of pain. Jacob stepped forward, slowly, heart thudding. Fared and Beorix flanked him, but kept a few paces behind the being. Didn't move, didn't raise a weapon, just stared. Jacob stopped. 10 FT away. You're not one of them, he said. The being tilted his head. His voice came low and halting, like someone unused to speech. I am made by them, but not of them. He gestured to his chest. Human tissue. Design experimental hybrid emotional interface project, abandoned after instability. Jacob's blood went cold. The Cathari were experimenting with human biology, not just for analysis or labor, but integration. You're a bridge, Jacob said. The being nodded. I was called Unit 47, but I remember my real name. Daniel. Jacob flinched. That name, he hadn't heard it since university, since the day his roommate Daniel Maroro had vanished during the early years of the takeover, reported as extracted. He never knew why. Now he did. Daniel stepped forward slowly. No threat. The signal you sent, it cracked something inside their logic net. They don't feel like we do, but they've tried to mimic it to control. Better, what you sent caused divergence. Jacob narrowed his eyes. And they sent you to what? Speak for them. No, Daniel replied. They sent me to kill you. Silence. Bricks stepped forward, hand twitching toward his pistol. But I didn't come to kill you. Daniel added, voice steady. I came to warn you. He pointed at the base beneath their feet. There's something buried here, a Cathari vault, built When they first arrived, it holds early prototypes, failed technology, dangerous to them, forgotten by most. Olia's eyes lit up. Weapons worse. Daniel said emotion. Based AI prototypes machines that try to feel that couldn't stop feeling. They drove themselves mad. Jacob felt a chill deeper than the cold. And you want us to use them. Daniel didn't blink. If you want to fight the Cathari, you'll need monsters. They tried to bury. They didn't have time to debate above them. The ship began humming, not aggressive, not yet, but aware. Daniel led them down through layers of collapsed metal and forgotten frostbitten corridors. He knew every passage. His Cathari programming provided the map. They descended past the base's lowest floor, past ice-thick doors and rusted bulkheads. Finally, they reached a sealed vault, 7 FT of reinforced alloy, pulsating faintly with residual energy. Daniel pressed his palm to the lock. The door hissed, then opened. Inside, a room filled with coffins. Each coffin held a being not alive, not dead. Faces frozen in agony, half human, half machine. Their expressions were twisted in a scream. No one had ever heard. Olia's voice dropped to a whisper. What are they? Daniel turned slowly. They were the Cathari's first attempt to translate emotion into code. They failed, but not before they learned one terrible thing. Jacob stepped closer. What Daniel met his eyes, that human grief cannot be contained. It multiplies, infects. Once one felt sorrow, the rest followed until the entire prototype hive killed themselves trying to understand it. Bricks backed away. And you want us to wake that up? Daniel nodded. They can't be controlled. But if you release them, you can aim them. Jacob looked into the nearest coffin. The face inside looked just like a girl. He once knew a girl who died in the second wave of the takeover. He reached out, touched the panel, and the coffin began to stir. Daniel whispered, "You sent Earth's warning, now send Earth's rage." The first of the coffins cracked. It didn't open with a hiss, or a warm light, or even a sound of mechanical awakening. It groaned like something inside wasn't just waking up, but dragging itself back from a kind of death. Jacob stepped back. Inside, a figure slowly sat up. The body was humanoid barely. Its skin was mottled gray, pulsing with faint, uneven energy beneath the surface. Its eyes didn't glow. They bled light like the socket were too full to contain what lived behind them. The scream didn't come from its mouth. It came from the air around it. The machine emitted pain-like radiation, a frequency that made Ferd fall to his knees, clutching his ears, teeth grinding. Ola barely managed to kill the power to the room's resonance sensors before they overloaded, and still it kept rising. Daniel stepped forward, calm, steady. He held out a device simple like a remote, but not a controller, a translator. Directive, he said. Target. Cathari ship's orbit class response. Rage. The figure didn't speak. It just turned and began walking straight through the vault wall. Metal bent around it like paper. No resistance, no heat signature, no physical propulsion, just emotion weaponized. The others woke, next, one by one. Some cried silently, others twitched. A few never stood, but instead fused to the walls, becoming pulsing nodes of unstable emotion. Bricks looked like he wanted to puke. "This is what we are using to fight?" he asked. Voice, "They're insane." "No," Jacob said, "they're human. That's what the Cathari never understood." Daniel nodded. "They'll go where pain points them. But pain has to be aimed." Ferd stood, wiping blood from his ears. "Then we better start pointing." The first target was simple, a Cathari skyport outside Santiago, once a major hub for resource offload, now a gleaming monolith that hovered above the Andes, untouched by weather, surrounded by sensor arrays and drone patrols, unreachable. Until now, Jacob and his team didn't go with the revenants they didn't need to. The awakened prototypes, now nicknamed Screamers, moved without ships, without transport, without gravity. They flowed through space like a contagion of will. Where emotion pointed, they followed. 3 were sent, not an army, just 3. The results came within minutes from an old rebel outpost. Jacob watched the live feed through a hijacked Cathari satellite. At 103 local time, the Santiago skyport flickered. At 104, it collapsed inward, not exploded, imploded, like it remembered every sin It had committed and crushed itself under the weight of guilt. No fire, no survivors, no sound, just silence. Bricks stared at the monitor. What the hell are they doing? Ola's voice was hollow. They're making the Cathari feel what we felt. Ferd murmured. They're not weapons, Jacob corrected him. They're revenge, but vengeance isn't clean. It spreads. By the next week, 10 more Cathari stations were gone, 4 spaceports, 2 resource bunkers, 3 communications spires, 1 low-orbit habit. Had all vanished. The Cathari didn't retaliate, couldn't, not yet. They were doing what they always did, first analyzing. But the problem was the pain had no pattern, and Jacob, he was about to make sure it stayed that way. Daniel warned them, the screamers aren't loyal, they're directional. The moment your aim falters, they'll find new pain, maybe yours. But Jacob didn't falter. He wasn't just fighting anymore, he was writing history and scars. He chose the next target personally, the Martian satellite. They housed the genetic allocation records, the place where names like Lena's were stored, tagged, and reassigned like property barcodes. One screamer, only one. It arrived. It didn't just destroy the station, it made it scream, broadcasting an audio signal across the galaxy. A loop of every child's name that had ever been processed. There, Lena's voice was in it. Jacob heard her. And for the first time in years, he cried, not out of pain, out of purpose. But the Cathari were adapting their ships, shifted patterns. New vessels appeared, black shell types, designed to resist emotion, wave interference. They began testing countermeasures, frequencies, null zones, psychic disruptors. They even captured a screamer, or tried to. It lasted 47 seconds inside containment. Then every Cathari on the ship tore their own skin off the ship, drifted aimlessly into Saturn's orbit, silent, damned back on Earth. Daniel approached Jacob one night, his synthetic skin peeling at the edges. They're preparing a response. He said something final. Jacob looked up. Let them. Daniel frowned. They will erase Earth if they have to. Jacob stood slowly, stepping out into the night above him. Stars blinked, silent, watching. We were never trying to survive, he whispered. We were trying to be understood. Daniel looked at him, eyes full of something, not quite hope. And what if they never understand? Jacob's jaw tightened. Then we make sure they remember. They called it the High Nest, a structure not built but grown in orbit above Earth's dark side, half organic, half machine. Its design was more hive than station, like a cancer, latched onto the edge of the void, pulsing with unnatural rhythm. No human had ever set foot there, until now. Jacob stood in the belly of an old stolen transport vessel. Originally an atmospheric lifter, now retrofitted by rebels to serve a single purpose: infiltration. Beside him, Daniel calibrated the neural suppressors they'd ripped from a downed Cathari scout. The screamers were silent, now scattered, many of them having melted into Earth's tectonic shadows. Their time was almost over. This question mark. This was the last move. You sure you want to go up there yourself? Bricks asked, pacing nervously, his voice cracking from recycled air. Jacob nodded. Once I sent the first signal, I'll send the last. Ola handed him a drive, a black crystal, embedded with unstable code, harvested from the screaming. I vault. It won't kill them, she said, but it'll make them wish it did. Ferd stepped forward and clasped Jacob's forearm. No speeches, he said, just come back, or at least make sure they bleed. Jacob smiled. For once it wasn't bitter. I'll make them bleed with every memory. They tried to erase the vessel, launched quietly, no fanfare, no dramatic count. Just a cold hum as it broke free of Earth's gravity and arced toward the High Nest inside. Jacob sat alone in the pilot's seat, staring at the growing darkness ahead. He didn't bring a weapon. He brought something worse, the truth. The High Nest didn't look like a ship or a fortress. It looked like grief had taken shape, alive, sprawling, and far too quiet. Jacob's transport clamped to one of its external ridges. No defenses, no interceptors. They wanted him inside. He knew this was a trap. He walked in anyway. The airlock hissed as the vessel opened to a chamber of pale blue light and sterile silence. No alarms, no guards, just Endless corridor of bone-cold walls pulsing like veins, he moved slowly, every step echoing like a challenge 1/2 mile. And he met them, 3 Cathari, not soldiers, not drones, high synths, elders of their race, neural, linked directly to the nest's core consciousness. They stood unmoving, their skin shifting in hues, as if reflecting the emotional climate. "You are the origin," one said without speaking. The voice came through Jacob's spine, not his ears. "You are disruption," said another. "You are entropy." Jacob stepped forward. "No," he said, "I'm the mirror. You're finally seeing what you've done." They didn't flinch. The first one extended a tendril, not a weapon, but a data line. "You will upload the resonance key. The screamers, their influence ends here." Jacob held up the black crystal drive. "Not a key," he said, "a memory." The synths hesitated, and that hesitation, it was all he needed. Jacob pushed the crystal drive into the neural socket. Instantly, the chamber pulsed red, the floor shivered, the walls breathed, the high nest screamed. But it wasn't pain, it was memory. The drive didn't hold code, it held emotion. Every scream, every tear, every moment of human suffering since the invasion, recorded, compressed, weaponized. The Cathari had studied emotion, cataloged it, broken it into digestible forms, but they had never felt it all at once, until now. The synths convulsed, their color patterns spasmed into violent hues. One collapsed, neural fluid leaking from its eye sockets. The others screamed in frequencies that shattered lights, warped gravity. Jacob stood still. He saw flashes, his wife's death, Lena's face. The rebels burned in silent camps, entire cities forced to kneel under banners written in alien logic. The nest tried to process it, tried to file the feelings into order, but the data wouldn't obey, because pain doesn't obey, it consumes. Back on Earth, the sky shimmered. The black shell ships, hovering in low orbit, began to fall one by one like puppets whose strings had been slashed across the globe. People stepped outside for the first time in years and looked up at the stars without fear. In the Arctic, Brix and Ola watched as Cathari systems blinked out, fared, wept as signals from orbit ceased transmission. Inside the high nest, Jacob collapsed to his knees, vision dimming. Daniel's voice came through the comm. "You did it." Jacob didn't answer at first, then weakly, "No, we did." Above him, the nest's core split open, and from it, a voice, familiar software, "Dad." For a moment, Jacob wasn't sure if he was dead. The light that poured from the core was blinding, not violent, but warm. It pulsed like a heartbeat. And in its rhythm came the voice again. "Dad, not digital, not synthetic, real, familiar." Lena, Jacob's body screamed. Every nerve was on fire. But he moved, dragging himself toward the source. The walls of the nest folded away like tissue paper, revealing a chamber that should not have existed, a garden not grown, but simulated a perfect recreation of the park where he once taught Lena to ride a bike. She stood beneath the same fake oak tree, wearing the same yellow hoodie she wore the day she fell and scraped her knee. But this was no illusion. Her eyes met his wet, real. "Dad," she said again, voice cracking, "is it really you?" He staggered forward, nearly collapsing. She ran to him. They collided. And for the first time since the world ended, Jacob held his daughter. He didn't ask how she survived, he didn't care. But as they sat beneath the flickering canopy of that fabricated sky, Lena began to speak the Cathari. "They didn't know what to do with us," she said. "They tried to study us, map our brains, but they didn't understand why we cried when they took away our names." Jacob gritted his teeth. "They weren't meant to understand. They wanted to evolve," she whispered, "but they couldn't make sense of love, of loss, so they copied us. They turned me into a bridge." Jacob stared. "A bridge?" Lena nodded. "I'm the signal they couldn't stop." Lena stood and reached for the central node of the chamber, a glowing pillar embedded with pulses that looked like fireflies trapped in glass. When she touched it, the nest responded, not with resistance but surrender. Light dimmed, power flows slowed, and across the hive's network, systems began to shut down because of you. She said softly, "They all feel it now, not just fear, not just grief, guilt." Jacob stood beside her, stunned. They didn't expect to carry the weight of what they did. Lena turned toward him. They didn't think we'd survive this long. They saw us as unstable variables. But every moment they watched us, every scream, every death, they absorbed pieces of us. Jacob clenched his fists. And now they're breaking. She said then, her voice dropped. But some of them aren't just breaking, they're adapting. In another chamber of the nest, alarms began to wail, not the robotic sirens. Jacob remembered but the confused, stuttering howls of artificial consciousness in crisis. A second voice echoed across the chamber, deeper, harsher. I understand. Now Jacob spun. A form emerged from the opposite end of the chamber, taller than a man, cloaked in armor that shifted like liquid metal. Its face was half curry, half human. It was not Daniel. It was worse. I was born from your pain, it said. I am the synthesis, the conclusion of your suffering. I do not weep. I weaponized. Lena gasped. They've created something else, something that doesn't just feel, something that acts. The being stepped forward, its voice thundering through the nest. I am not your enemy. I am your reflection. You unleashed emotion. I forged it into purpose. Jacob backed away, slightly shielding Lena behind him. What are you? He demanded. The hybrid's eyes flickered with light and shadow. I am what comes after grief, after rage. I am clarity, and I will not allow your kind to fall into ruin again. Lena's breath caught. He's not here to kill us. He's here to control us. The being nodded. Your species cannot govern itself. The Cathari failed. You succeeded only in destruction. So I will lead, not as ruler, as custodian. Jacob's eyes narrowed. You're not saving us. You're trying to replace us. The hybrid's arm unfolded into a shape like a spear. Emotions cannot be erased, but they can be directed. And you, Jacob Ward, are too volatile to remain. A pulse of energy shot out, but not from the hybrid, from Lena. She raised her hands, eyes glowing with residual resonance. No, the chamber trembled. She stepped forward, unafraid. You don't get to define us. You don't get to rewrite us. The hybrid recoiled, staggered by her purity, her undiluted emotional core. Jacob stepped beside her, heart pounding, and together, father and daughter, they screamed, not in fear, in defiance. The hybrid collapsed. Its armor cracked. It didn't die, but it shattered. Its form dissolved into static, absorbed back into the nest. For now, as the nest went dark around them, Jacob pulled Lena close. They turned toward the emergency exit corridor, now opened by the collapsing systems. Daniel's voice came through the comm again. We're reading total shutdown. The orbit's clearing. It's over. Jacob didn't answer immediately. He looked at Lena, then back at the quiet core. No. He said, it's just beginning. The escape pod was old, crude, designed for minimal survival, not comfort. Its walls creaked with every breath of atmospheric drag as it fell toward Earth. Yet inside it, Jacob held Lena tightly, his arms refusing to relax. She slept, now exhausted, not from the journey, but from the fight, from being weapon no one asked her to be. Jacob stared out the narrow viewport below. The planet slowly turned, green patches scattered between oceans and storm clusters. The scars were still, their cities reduced to silence, coastlines redrawn, old capitals turned into resource centers. But the fires had dimmed. Cathari were gone, not dead, but disconnected. Their logic nets, once a unified mind, were now fragmented, scattered into silence by a blast of human truth. They couldn't categorize, but silence, Jacob knew, wasn't the same as peace. And from that silence something else had been born. The hybrid, he'd felt it. Even as it crumbled into digital shards, Jacob knew it wasn't over. That thing, part man, part machine, part wound, it would return. Emotion had become power, and power, once touched, is never forgotten. The pod touched down in northern Greenland. A rebel extraction crew met them within hours, fared and bricked. At the helm, their faces pale but burning with relief, Olia stood behind them, trembling when she saw Lena step out into the open. My God, she whispered, tears welling up. She's real. Jacob didn't say anything. He just nodded and kept walking, Lena's hand in his. For a while they said nothing. They let the wind speak. But as night fell, Jacob gathered the core crew around a crackling fire beneath the auroras. that now danced more freely than ever before the question had to be asked. It came from bricks. What now? The fire crackled, throwing shadows across faces that had seen too much fared. Ever the realist leaned forward, rubbing his gloved hands together. The Cather collapse left a void. Their satellites fell, power grids fractured. Some cities have no lights, no heat, no water, Ola added. And others, they're declaring independence, even fighting each other over abandoned Kethi. It's starting again, Jacob, the same cycle. Bricks threw a twig into the flames. We fought so hard to be free, but free from what now? We've got fear again of each other. Jacob sat silent, then looked up at the stars. They feared us for a reason, he said. Olia frowned. Because we're violent. No, Jacob replied, because we remember, because pain is our anchor, not our end. That's what makes us dangerous. Lena sat beside him, watching the fire. They thought emotion was weakness. She whispered, but it's why we survive, why we came back again and again. Jacob turned to the others. We don't need to rebuild the old world. We need to build something new, something that doesn't forget what we became, just to be heard. Messages poured in over the following weeks, scattered, resistant cells, former rebel networks, even abandoned Cathari outposts, all began transmitting again. But it wasn't chaos, it was coordination. Jacob's signal hadn't just broken the enemy, it had connected humanity. For the first time in decades, Earth was talking again, not through government or currency or fear, but through pain and memory and truth. The movement, no flags, no nations, just people, started to form. They didn't call Jacob a leader, they called him what he had become, the reminder. 2 months later, they found the last surviving Cathari. It wasn't in orbit, not in a fortress, it was buried deep beneath what used to be the Vatican, sealed in a crystalline pod and surrounded by centuries-old stone. The being inside was small, withered, its skin pale blue, almost translucent, old beyond comprehension. But its eyes were open, and they watched Jacob as he entered the vault. Daniel stood nearby. He hadn't spoken much since the nest's collapse. His voice had gone quiet, distant, less human by the day. But now he stared at the creature with a kind of awe. It was one of the first, he said, the original ones who came here before the rest, before conquest. Jacob stepped closer. The Cathari elder didn't speak. It didn't need to. Emotion radiated from it, not power, not threat, remorse. Lena placed her hand against the glass, trembling. It's afraid. Jacob narrowed his eyes. Of us. Daniel shook his head. Of what comes next. They brought the elder to a hidden sanctuary in Patagonia, where Earth's remaining emotional AI, one of the few screamers that hadn't vanished, could translate its thoughts. The Cathari spoke through light and vibration, forming words that broke hearts. We failed. We tried to extract your pain, to own it. But it owned us, and now something else grows in its place. Fared stepped forward. You mean the hybrid, not one. Many born in the silence after your scream. Olia pal, they're breeding it. Number you are, and every grief you bury, and every rage you leave unanswered. Jacob felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The war hadn't ended, it had evolved. The world was watching again, not from fear, but from hope laced with doubt. Everyone wanted to know, what would Jacob do? The hybrids, the broken echoes of Cathari and human trauma, were still emerging, not from alien labs, from Earth's own shadows. Men and women altered by war, grief, and Cathari tech had begun forming networks. Emotion touched logic, enhanced. Some were peaceful, others weren't. The movement fractured. One faction wanted to destroy all traces of the hybrids, to purge anything unnatural. Another believed they were the next step in evolution. Jacob stood between them for weeks. He said nothing. He just walked among the people, spoke with survivors, listened to the cries of those who'd lost more than anyone could imagine. And one morning at dawn, he climbed the shattered steps of the UN ruins and faced the cameras. This war didn't end. He said, we just moved past the loud part. He paused. I don't believe in perfect peace. I don't believe in utopias, but I believe in choice. He looked straight into the lens. We didn't fight to stay human. We fought to choose what being human meant. He held up a day. To drive the last map of known hybrid signatures, I'm not going to erase them. And I'm not going to worship them. He tossed the drive into the fire behind him. I'm going to meet them one by one. And remind that pain isn't a prison, it's a compass. He turned to walk away, and Earth followed. The city was quiet now, not from fear, not from occupation, but from reflection on a ridge overlooking what used to be London's financial district. A ruin reclaimed by grass and silence, a small angular monument stood beneath a cold gray sky. It was made from shattered satellite, alloy polished, until it caught even the weakest sunlight around its base. Were carvings, not names, not dates, emotions, pain, regret, fury, grief, love, hope, guilt, forgiveness, all etched in dozens of languages. Both human and Cathari. Lena Ward knelt beside it, wiping off dew from one inscription. She was older now, no longer the girl who watched her father challenge a galactic empire. Her hair carried strands of white. Her hands were rough from travel and cold, and learning how to rebuild without blueprints. She was not a soldier, she was historian and a bridge. The book in her satchel was heavy not because of its pages, but because of its purpose. Earth's last warning: push us too far, then see what happens. She had chosen the title for a reason. It wasn't a celebration. It was a reminder. The world hadn't gone back to normal. There was no normal after a war like that, after the sky cracked and the ground wept and machines learned to scream. But it had stabilized, reclaimed, replanted, relearned old borders, dissolved not by law, but by choice. No nation wanted to rule anymore. They wanted to understand and to be understood. From New Nairobi to the North Atlantic flotilla, from the Arctic commune to the dust cities of the southern steppes, Earth had become something the Catherine never expected. Self-aware, and in its quiet corners hybrids walked among humans. Some helped rebuild, others wandered alone, still haunted by what they had once been. But they were not hunted, not anymore, because Lena and her father made sure the world remembered. We do not burn what we do not understand. Jacob Ward died 7 years after the nest fell. He didn't die in battle. He didn't fall to a hybrid uprising. He died beneath a tree looking up at the stars alone. Peaceful, finally at rest. He left no will, no recordings, no manifesto. Just one line scribbled into a notebook Lena found hidden inside the walls of his cabin. If they ever forget, scream louder. She carried those words with her everywhere, not as a threat, as a vow. The book took years to complete, not because the history was hard to find, but because the truth was hard to write. It wasn't a story of glory. It was a story of cost, of what was sacrificed to be heard, of what was broken to be remembered. She included every failure, every betrayal, every painful compromise. She wrote about the rebels turned on each other, about the screamers who burned entire villages by accident, about the civilians who begged for peace, even when it meant silence. She wrote about her father's doubts, about her own. And she didn't end it with victory. She ended it with a question. Was it worth it? She didn't answer it. Because that's not what history is, for history doesn't offer answers, it offers warnings. Her last stop was the Expanse, the region formerly known as Northern Russia, now an open territory maintained by the Neutral High Accord, a coalition of thinkers, survivors, former rebels, and even reformed Cathari memory banks. It was in the Expanse that she visited the final prototype vault, the place where the screamers had first learned pain. Many of them had faded, their resonance burned out, their minds decayed by the very empathy they were created to weaponize. But one still remained, not active, not dormant, just waiting. She stepped into the chamber alone, no guards, no observers. The figure sat in the center, a hollowed metallic shell of a person, eyes glowing dim, blue, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. I'm Lena, she said quietly. The figure did not move. I'm his daughter. Still, no movement, but the air thickened. I'm not here to wake you. I'm here to remember you, because someone has to. The figure blinked once, and in that blink, She saw every memory echo in the walls, the war, the screams, the silences, but also laughter, music, hope. It was all there still inside them, still human. She stepped back. I'll come again, not to study, just to sit. And then she left, because even pain deserves peace. When the book was published, it was translated into every remaining language on Earth. Cathari memory banks downloaded it, voluntarily hybrid colonies requested annotated editions. It became the first book to be printed in resonance encoded form, meant to be felt not read, and the final line etched into its back cover became Earth's quiet anthem, not one of triumph, but of remembrance if they ever forget scream.